everybody. I am so glad that you are tuning in once again to Breakaway. I am Liz Ferguson, your host, and today I am doubly excited because I have Shannalei Henry with me, who is a professional in the mental health field, and I invited her to come along and just share some thoughts with us. But before we get started, Shannalei, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience?
So, as you said, Shannalei Henry, better known as Shanna. And so, where do I start? So, I now have my own business, and it's called In Your Corner, where I do therapeutic coaching. And I've God has blessed me with the ability to be able to create a journal, that also provides support in that kind of mental health field. But I graduated with my bachelor's in social work in 2014, with my master's in 2015 from Hunter College. Did some work in New York. I'm from Connecticut, so I did some work up north, and then I moved here and did different jobs working with different populations between schools and in providing therapy in homes. Have worked in shelters, have had the opportunity of going back to the school system, and then doing what I'm doing now, which is my own business, as well as also doing assessments for another company. So kind of been able to dabble into different things and definitely learn a lot throughout the way, and continue actually learning a lot about mental health and assessing and being able to be a support and like what that looks like. So that's a little bit of the background.
Awesome. Well, I am definitely excited to have you on with me. And not just because that means I didn't have to do a whole bunch of research this week because I had a professional with me. But no, for real, I have some questions that I gathered, and I know that in conversation with a few of the viewers, just different questions that have come up. And so one of the things that we're curious about is specifically for you and your experience in the field of mental health. What have you seen, or what do you know, are some of the things that hold us back from actually breaking away from old patterns? And if you know, like, one that stands out as like the huge obstacle or challenge, then
Mhm.
share that as well.
I would say, in my experience, a lot of the things that hold us back is our mindset and us underestimating the work or the effort that has to be put in to be able to break away. And so things like really making the decision, this is something that I no longer want to do, or this is something that, I really want to see change in. Um, and then wanting to see like that true transformation. I think that a lot of times we're like, this isn't good for me. Maybe I should change this. But you haven't really made a decision to really step away from that. And then sometimes we're like, no, I really want to change this. I really want to see this transformation. But then we underestimate what has to take place, whether it's stepping away from those relationships, or like not doing this thing, or not going down this route, or saying no to the things that we're used to saying yes to. And kind of just making that real decision is really hard, I think. Especially when you do realize the things that we have to change and the effort that has to be put in, it's so much easier to just lean into those old habits.
So thinking
Mhm.
about what you're saying about the effort and also the underestimation, or even maybe overestimation of how ready I might be. Um,
Mhm.
because I tend to be one of those that overestimates, like, oh, and it's like, oh. What are some of the things that would help us have more success in conquering either one of those?
I would say letting go and stopping the mentality of us trying to do it on our own. Um, we weren't created to do things on our own, right? Leaning on God, having the support system is super important. I think we live in a world a lot of times where we're like, I can do it on my own and I don't need anyone. And where there are certain things that you have to do independently, right? Like you have to make the decision to do it on your own, right? You have to take those steps. And it's something that you have to do the work in. A lot of times we take that to a whole other level, And so instead of leaning on the supports that are in our lives, or like just stepping outside of ourselves and that comfort zone, I think a lot of times we stop our progress because we don't lean into the things that are meant to lift us up and help us, break away from those things.
Gotcha. So, for that person that is either super private or
Mhm,
struggles with opening up to other people, maybe because of past trauma,
mhm.
how do you go about helping them understand that expectation and embracing it?
So, and I can speak to you not only as a professional, but like as an individual outside of that space. Vulnerability for me can be very uncomfortable. Vulnerability is kind of like the emotional like nakedness, if we shall like kind of see it that way, right? You are exposing kind of like the deepest parts of you. And so I think that being able to find at least one person, right, that you have been able to see, like if you look at their Carfax, right, you see that they are someone that you believe you can trust, and you can go to them. um and will be able to kind of challenge you in the most positive ways. They're not going to lie to you, right? Because then the other part of it is like, well, this person just always tells me good things. Well, there are certain things that are not so good, right? And having that person that we trust, and being able to go to them. So even if it's just finding that one person, for certain people, when I work with them, they're like, I don't have anyone, right? I don't have anyone that I feel I supports me or that I can go to, and those are the ones that are coming to be assessed or coming to therapy, right? Well, maybe it's your therapist, you know? Maybe it's that's the one person that you're like, a lot of people say, well, it's the stranger that I can talk to and I don't feel judged. Perfect. Let that one person be it, but at least finding someone, and kind of that's the part of stepping outside of ourselves, especially like a lot of people, I'm an introvert, I don't really like talking to the people. That's, I get it, that's fine, but part of also being able to experience a change is stepping outside of ourselves, so taking it one step at a time.
I love that, right? It reminded me of I was talking to, it's no secret that I see a therapist once a week, right? So
Mhm,
I was talking to him a few months ago, and he's like, I feel bad. Like our sessions had gotten shorter and shorter. We meet every week, and our sessions had
mhm.
gotten shorter and shorter. And I think that session was like 10 minutes. And he's like, I feel really bad. Like I would feel like I'm doing nothing for you. And I told him exactly what you just said. I was like, actually, I speak to no one else. You are the only person that I share everything with, and that gives me an outlet. So don't
Mhm.
feel like, I was like, if you're feeling like you're just taking my money, like, don't feel that way, because in reality, you're my only outlet, because I don't speak to anybody else about any of these things. Or, or just, I just share pieces, but I never like dive deep into the conversation. So definitely for me, as one of those like uber private people, having my paid friend, as I like to call him now, has been super helpful, because it does, like you said, it gives that outlet to be able to talk and definitely find some more success. Now, is that also a way of like safeguarding ourselves from regressing back or returning back to old patterns, or what are some additional ways that we can ensure that we have safeguards and not revert back?
It's so funny that you even started it that way, because I think that communication and avoid hiding is like the biggest one, right? Outside of, right, so communication, not hiding. When we struggle with things, the first thing that we want to do is keep it to ourselves for whatever the reasons are, whether you have felt judged in the past or you are embarrassed or it's even pride, right, that you're struggling with. And so then we try and carry that load alone, and that load gets really, really heavy and it wears you down. And because you're doing this all on your own and you're being worn down, the first thing, or not maybe the first thing, but the easiest thing to do is to go back to that old pattern, right? Because it's just so much easier to deal with that rather than deal with this whole thing that feels like this biggest load. Um, I think something else is not going down like the same path that you were going in. What do I mean by that? Right. A lot of times when you talk to people that may have struggled with some sort of addiction, they'll say when they kind of are starting to break out of it or their recovery, they're like, I can't go down this certain street because if I go down this street, it immediately brings back this memory. And before I know it, I'm falling back into this. I can't hang out with these same people because all they do is XYZ. And I've already said that I didn't want to do this. And I'm in recovery. And I know that if I hang out with them, it may not happen the first time, but the fifth time we hang out, I'm right back in that pattern. So kind of like that mindset of if I'm deciding to make this change and go down this different path, then there may be whether it's certain people I can't spend time with or certain places that maybe I shouldn't go, certain music maybe I shouldn't listen to, certain TV shows or genres that I should stay away from. And I know it can sound, maybe people are like, oh, Shauna, like you're doing the most, like it shouldn't be that serious. But when you have created kind of like this habit in this comfort zone in this specific space, everything that's attached to that thing that you're trying to step away from, you kind of have to be able to kind of cut it. For some people, they if they just limit it a little bit, it works for them. It's also getting to know yourself and being aware of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. You may be the person that can limit spending time in that area with those people. You may be the person that's like, I just can't do it at all. I got to step away completely. And that's kind of a safeguard for us.
I love that. I think back to some of the things that I've done in the last few months. And one of the things that you mentioned for me personally has actually been limiting my TV watching time. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't sound like TV is that bad. Like, Liz, it's TV. Like, you sound so, 1980s Puerto Rican, Pentecostal. But it's like, it's for me, it was just TV. It's not even just the TV. It's that it was my kind of like my escape, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was what I used to be able to shut everything down and out and just like vegetate and be able to ignore all the problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my outlet, for lack of a better word, and not realizing that at the same time that I was using it as an outlet, some of the things that I was watching were actually feeding my negativity, and they were feeding my depression and whatever other feelings I had at the time. And it's, limiting that time
Yeah.
has definitely been useful, for sure. Now, when you're talking about um, putting these type of safeguards in place, right?
Mhm.
What are some of the combating type of messages that maybe you've heard from some of the people that you're helping, and you're letting them know, like, hey, this is something that's important that you have to put into effect, and they're rebutting you with.
Sometimes that's just too hard. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. With people when it comes to relationships, right? Especially when we're talking about things that people may be going through that it may be limiting certain family time, right?
Mhm.
Depending on what your culture is, that seems very close to impossible. Especially when we talk to people when it comes to boundaries, right? When you're talking about boundaries, we come from a Hispanic culture. And boundaries, like that was never something that was heard growing up. Like, if
No.
anything, falta de respeto, like that's you are being disrespectful. What do you mean boundaries, right? I'm mom, I'm that. And so especially when I'm talking to clients from different cultures, right? It's kind of just like I can't do that, especially if they're still living at home with the family or holidays or like birthdays. Like those are like big celebrations. And it's like, how do I set a boundary with uncle, aunt, mom, whatever that is? And so a lot of that is kind of just like I can't do that, or I'm gonna be seen as disrespectful, or um like what else am I supposed to do if this is something that I've been doing for so long? And a lot of that, a lot of times it's just like this self-doubt. They feel like they are so incapable of being able to taking those steps. And I definitely empathize, right, with a lot of them, especially when it comes to culture, because I understand that. So it's a lot of taking the baby steps. I think when people hear that, they're like, oh my gosh, it's like a cold turkey kind of feeling. Well, I can't do this cold turkey.
Hmm.
Okay, so then don't, right? Take one step at a time. Watch, you also be mindful of the tone, right? When it comes to certain things, going back to like the boundaries, right? Be mindful of your tone. It doesn't have to be disrespectful. But I also let clients know, when it comes to things with relationship or when it involves someone else, you're the one that's doing the work. This individual isn't. So there's a lot of things that may feel harder before it gets easier. And that's anything when it comes, honestly, to anything that we're trying that's new. But I always say that in the mental health field. Um, it's gonna feel a little worse before it gets better, and that's okay, right? You are going to get a lot of pushback from people when the people aren't the ones that are doing the work, because they're not going to understand it. However, you have to remember why you're doing this. You have to remember what your end goal is. You have to remember that you understand why this is being done and this individual doesn't, because they haven't been in the sessions with you. So kind of like that reminder. So I added more to the answer, but I hope
No,
that makes sense.
no, I love that. And I mean, I love everything about boundaries. I think I've read Boundaries. In fact, I'm reading it again. So,
Thank you.
Boundaries by Dr. Claude. I'm reading it again. So it's fine. It is useful because it is hard to set those parameters or set those boundaries
Mhm,
up. And I like what you said about remembering that the individual that has chosen to do the work of breaking away and going through transformation, they're the ones
mhm,
doing the work, not the people around them necessarily. And so, we have to tailor our expectations. I know that, for me, speaking specifically just about me, I
mhm,
tend to think that because I'm doing the work of doing this transformation, this transformative work and breaking away, that it means that, this person that I'm close to is required to do that same work as well. And it's like, no, they're not. They're their own person. They can do whatever they want. And I'm not doing this for the individual. I'm
mhm,
doing it for myself. So I like that. Now, I know that you're not necessarily, like my therapist, he is a Christian, but he is not a Christian therapist, right? So I know
gotcha.
that you're the same, right?
Mhm,
You're a believer, but you don't necessarily, title yourself like this is Christian
yeah.
therapy, right?
Mhm,
But I was curious to know from your perspective, because you have both sides of the perspective,
mhm.
um, how how are you able to connect mental health strategies and biblical concepts?
Honestly, that's in everything when it comes to like the mental health field, whether it's labeled that or not.
Hmm.
When you talk about everything from positive, support systems, right? Wise counsel, when the Bible talks about that. Working on your mind being transformed and renewed, right? Communication, prayer,
Hmm.
listening to your inner voice, the Holy Spirit. And like the list goes on, right? When you learn to lean on God and allow the Holy Spirit to do the work in you, and then you allow the Holy Spirit to guide you, you learn to listen to his voice, right? You learn to hold your tongue when necessary. You learn to speak with wisdom rather than, with a foolish tongue or just a loose tongue. You learn to rest in God. You are reminded of God's promises, and which gives you like that peace and that patience in the process that can be and feel a little rough. It's easier to let go of those old and negative coping skills, because you're reminded that you aren't alone, and that God gives you a way out of tempting situations. But in the mental health field, right, there tends to always be this focus on like the physical the emotional, the cognitive, right? That has to do with your thoughts, and the social. But then there's always an added part, which is spirituality. And a lot of times when you go to an agency, or you're going to an individual like with their own business or anything like that, many times in like the questionnaire that they'll give you, right? Or if maybe they don't give you a questionnaire in just like the first assessment conversation, they will ask like, what is your religious background? What is your faith? And so a lot of times that's asked because that is something that is seen as kind of like that support system for an individual. And I didn't realize it when I first started, in the field, like studying and doing all of that. But later on, as I was reading and even being a part of different jobs and agencies, like I realized that question came up a lot. And in conversation with people, when they do have some kind of like religious background and they lean on that, you tend to see kind of another level of support where they may say, I don't have family support, or I don't really feel like I have like like friends or anything like that, but I lean on my church family, or like I go to meetings, or like I go to different services. And even in the assessments that I do now, the question is also asked, how often do you go?
Mm,
So as much as it is about, right, the mental health field, as it is about your emotions and like your experiences that you've gone through, and the mental processes, all of that stuff, it's also very much leaning on like, what does your spiritual life look like? Because I do believe that there's an importance in that, and being uplifted, and that patience and that peace, and everything else that faith factor adds in.
awesome. And that brings out a little curiosity in me, right?
Mhm.
Because as as I hear you talking, right, and me coming from, the theological background that I have, I would tend to suppose, right,
Mhm.
that a person who has that spiritual foundation should, in essence, have more success
Mhm.
than someone who doesn't. So, just out of curiosity, what's been your experience with that? Have you seen that be the case, or have you seen the opposite?
To be honest with you, I feel like I have seen that be the case. In some of my jobs, I just do the assessment piece, right? So I don't get to see the after. I don't get to see the work that's done. I'm literally the first person that they meet, and they get to talk to, and kind of like release a
Mhm.
little bit of what's been going on. And then with that, the assessment takes place, the diagnosis is given, and then we talk about their goals, and that's it. The therapist then takes on that role. But with the ones that I have been able to do the work, right, they are the clients that I take on. You tend to see light bulbs, I feel like, go off a little bit, in not maybe faster, just in a different way, and they're able to connect those things, and they're able to kind of, in the connections, they take kind of like that mental health piece, plus what they know and understand about their faith and how they live their lives. And when they make that connection, it's kind of like this like firework for them. And I tend to see a little more progress with them, maybe a little faster sometimes, or they're a little more willing to kind of lean into the process a little more.
Gotcha. And obviously, that's not to say that if you do not have any
No.
spiritual belief that you won't have success. I was just curious to
Hmm.
hear if she had experienced any type of connection, because I
Hmm.
mean, I can obviously see the opposite of that, of someone who either fails to make that connection, or it takes it to a different level where then it's like, oh well, God's gonna do everything and I'm just gonna wait on God to do it. And God's looking down like, no boo, you
No.
got to do some work here too.
Hmm. Yep.
So so it definitely goes both ways. So and with this we'll close, but just any thoughts that you might have on the whole concept of breakaway or transformation, whether it's personal experience or just things that you've seen, just anything that you want to share.
I honestly believe from personal experience, because I feel like I'm constantly constantly going through this process. But I think that a lot of times when you're in the beginning phases of it, honestly throughout it, right? But especially the beginning phases, it hurts, right? Um, and because we tend to not like pain, right? For the most part, there are some, but for the most part, we tend to not like pain. It feels so much easier to just give up. It feels so much easier to give up. It feels so much easier to just hide, like what I was talking about, just hide. And I don't want to talk about it. And I don't, because a lot of times, depending on what life has looked like, you're like, I just don't want to hear what anyone has to say. Like, or I know what they're going to say, and it's not negative, right? Not talking about the negative piece, just I know what the encouraging word's going to be. And I just don't want to deal with it, right? Um, but although there is a level of pain, right, because something is breaking, there's change, there's transformation, and when that happens, there's like this shedding, right, that takes place with it. What I'm always reminded of is it is so worth it, you know, and being able to kind of step out of myself and even seeing clients that step out of themselves and kind of lean on those supports, it makes it a little easier when you're going through that painful time when you're being supported. Doesn't mean that you have to like give your whole life, right? And like tell everyone like this is everything that's going on. But when you have, that core group or that core person, let's say, and definitely being able to kind of just lean on God the whole time. There are times where it's God, there's transformation that's happening, there's change that's going on. This hurts and it's uncomfortable. Like you're allowing this to happen. I'm leaning on you. You got to do what you got to do, but I need you to help me. Right. And then being able to experience like that support from God and like that peace in the midst of everything that's going on and in the midst of that transformation, but knowing that there's purpose. I think a lot of times when we know, okay, this is the end goal or there's a reason for this, it's like, all right, I'm gonna push because I need to know what the reason is. Right. Like if I'm gonna go through this, like I'm gonna find out what is at the end of this. And so breaking away, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy, but man, is it worth it? So
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And you said so many things, but one of the things that you said that really struck a chord with me when you were talking about the pain and our desire to hide and involving God in the process. It reminded me of this message that I heard this week from Lisa Harper. And it's funny because I heard it from her twice and not intentionally. It was two different services that I was watching, and it turned out that it was the same idea, the same message taught
oh
different ways.
man.
And I'm like, okay, God is clearly trying to tell me something. And now you said it, right? With the whole pain and hiding and God connection. And, she uses the story of Elijah. And, if you're not familiar with it, basically, Elijah has just at the end of his most triumphant moment, he actually experiences a moment of emotional distress when the queen decides that she wants to take his life because he's really shown up and allowed God to show out and show his magnificent power. And so we look at him run away, even though he just was at the pinnacle of this amazing success. But his fear and his doubt just take over, and he goes into hiding. And he's going into hiding, running from, what this possible experience could mean for him. And it's just beautiful how, when we look at that, we see how God doesn't come in being all judgmental and like, hey, I said I was going to give you strength. Hey, I said I'm always here for you. Or, hey, yeah, I tell you to cast your anxieties on me, to cast your burdens on me, that I got you. Like, that's not how God steps in at all. And I love that, one of the things that she says is, God steps in and he's like, here, take a nap. Here, have some food.
Mhm.
And he
Mhm.
gives the prophet rest and he feeds the prophet. And then, he calls him forth out of that hiding place so that they can have communication. And it's, in coming out of that hiding and allowing himself to be honest in front of God that he's able to then, kind of recalibrate and
Mhm.
regain his composure and, go back to do what he's supposed to do. So you just mentioned those things and it just brought that to the forefront because so many times that is our response to
Mhm.
to run and hide, and not just from individuals but to run and hide from God. And God is like, I got you, like, come
Right.
to me. But he's not saying it with like an attitude. He's like genuinely wanting to be there for us. So
Mhm.
I love that you made that connection also of God being involved. So, if anybody wanted to reach out to you afterwards because they were interested in following up, maybe with In Your Corner, is there any way that they can contact you? And I'll also drop the information in the comments below.
Yeah. So Instagram __ in your corner, through email, iycornerllc@gmail.com, Facebook in your corner, or __ in your corner as well as the Instagram. But in any way, shape, or form, here to serve. So
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us.
thank
And
you.
I am so excited that you were able to share with us. And I know that I will be asking you back on in the near future. So I appreciate you joining, and thank you. And anybody else who's watching, thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, please drop them below in the comments and
Okay.
we will definitely get back with you. Have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.